Hello everyone.
Hello. So my name's Tom, and Ben and I today are going to be talking about investment management, investing in software and software projects. We're going to share with you a very secret sauce. So
No, Tom. No, there is no secret sauce. These guys already have all the ingredients.
Oh, okay. Actually, you might be right, Ben. I think the ingredients are there, but I think the recipes we cook with those ingredients are wrong. And by that, I mean the principles are sound to a lot of investment management. The way we apply that in software today, I think, is broken. I spent a lot of time working in large institutions, lots of people, lots of projects running around, lots of investment. And we've got it wrong most of the time, I think.
So, as Tom said, I'm Ben. I've been working at a number of companies, a lot of them large, but more recently small. And one thing that struck me was that we tended to spend more time, and still do tend to spend more time, looking at and tracking the delivery of software than we spend on actually delivering the software.
So, hands up how many people here work or have worked in finance? Well, you need to leave because the source is too secret. No, so a lot of you will be familiar with financial models for portfolio management. So for those that aren't, fund managers will manage large portfolios, large groups of investments in various assets, foreign exchange, equities, bonds, those kind of things. And they can't do that on their own. So they do that with a bunch of other people. They spread the responsibility for managing those assets with others. And we believe that you can use that same means, that same approach to how you manage investments in finance directly into software. But it means changing a whole bunch of the way we do stuff. Some of you are probably thinking, hang on a minute, those crazy kids on Wall Street get it wrong sometimes, right? Spectacularly sometimes. But we assert that's actually down to how they implement the approach, not the approach itself. And the approach is sound for managing gazillions of dollars, every single day. So, here are some questions that might give you a clue around what we think about investment management, what we think it is. So, the first thing to think about, and when we say portfolio management, often people will think, well, that's something that happens, way up in the cloud somewhere. But actually, it happens a lot lower down in organizations than I think we tend to think. So, anyone involved in answering those kind of questions within teams is doing investments. Programs, yes, projects, but work streams within projects, even features are investments. They're all investments in some business outcome. So it happens every day, it's happening all the time. In companies, they're running tens, hundreds, thousands of investments at any given time. And that's a lot of stuff to manage. So we need tools to help us manage that. So we've come up with an approach. This is the approach Ben and I have been working on and tend to use to try and get the cycle of investment going. And some of these terms may be a bit abstract. We'll describe these, and we'll describe them with practical examples of how we implement these. Some of the questions that might sort of crop up in general conversation tend to be more grounded in the real world. Well, what should we build? What should it do? Are we there yet, or was a favourite? Do we need to take some action? Is this a good investment? And did we build the right thing? Have we learned to make a different decision next time? Is it the right thing? Should we keep doing that thing? So any questions in and around that space are within this model of investment management, we think.
Okay, so what's the problem? I mean, why are we here? It seems very simple. If people are doing it in finance, why are we not doing it in software? And actually, there's a couple of reasons. Well, at least we think why. So we used to deliver software at a very, very slow pace. So glacial, believe it or not, given the picture. Which meant we used to deliver probably months or maybe even years for one delivery. When we delivered only one delivery, we only made one change to the world. We only impacted the businesses we delivered the software for once. So in order to think about how we were progressing, we used to track software. So we'd basically look at percentage complete. So we'd work our way through this percentage thing, we'd release software, and that was our job done. Then we had a revolution, the Agile revolution. And Agile said, actually, we're not happy with delivering software every 12 months or 9 months or 8 months or even 3 months. And we've got that down now to weeks or even days, which is great because it means that actually we can start to deliver impacts on that same frequency. So we can deliver impacts to the businesses you work within on a daily basis. However, we still seem to be measuring progress of software. On top of that, worse still, some of us still track input, so we still track timesheets. And also, not only have we probably all been on this nice little journey, and some people have actually never experienced what I've just talked about, but some people weren't brought along on the ride. So there were people who were involved in the software development process who weren't brought into this agile bandwagon, namely project management. So project management didn't come on this journey. We didn't update them. We didn't tell them to expect a higher frequency of delivery, and we didn't tell them what they could do with this new information. So tracking software is really quite compelling because it gives us some control, or at least the illusion of control. So because we're so involved in tracking software, we tend to forget this thing which we just talked about, which is making an impact. Making an impact to the business, and we're still ignoring that. The problem is, although this gives us the illusion of control, it only gives us control of software. It doesn't give us control of the outcome. It doesn't give us control of success. So it's worth noting that Agile talks about fast feedback. So what do? Generally, at the end of every sprint, we'll do a sprint demo. For those of you working in Flowbase, we might have a column that says demo to stakeholder. But essentially, we're demoing software to our stakeholders. So that's great. We get fast feedback on software, but fast feedback on software is kind of missing the point. What use is that? We can change what software we build, but we don't know whether we're getting fast, or we don't know whether that software is being used, how it's being used, whether it's creating an impact. So we think, in fact, that tracking of software or delivery of software or fast feedback on software is actually of very little importance. What we do need is fast feedback on impact. And cap it all off, we don't really seem to learn. So we've come a long way with things like engineering disciplines, but we don't really, and we haven't really come a long way in the space of delivering successful work. And work, as Tom said, can be features or projects or work streams.
So this is our working title for the kind of the work we're doing in this area, investing in impact. We think of this as a leaner approach to investing in software. So as I mentioned at the start, a load of the principles for portfolio management, even traditional portfolio management, are very sound. A load of the agile principles are very sound. Drawing on those to come up with a new sort of practical practice set is where we'll go next, and drawing in parallel to finance and how we apply that thinking.
So what we're going to do now is walk you through the model with a little bit of detail. So the first step is deciding whether we want to invest in an opportunity. And again, that could be down to the feature level, or it could be multi-million-dollar programs of work. So what we think is that we need to explicitly acknowledge hypotheses, and a business case which is basically just spend money and make money isn't probably good enough.
This is where all our work is done. So what are you going to do with all these underpants that you steal? Collecting underpants is just phase 1. Phase 1, collect underpants. So what's phase 2? Hey, what's phase 2? Phase 1, we collect underpants. Yeah, but what about phase 2? Well, phase 3 is profit. Get it? I don't get it. You see, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit. Oh, I get it. No, you don't, fat ass.
Okay, so it's a light-hearted take on actually probably what many of us face every day. So exactly the same thing exists in software, we believe, in many cases. So phase 1, write software. Phase 3, make money. And there's a big gap in the middle there. And actually what we want to do is we want to bridge that gap. So we want to explicitly acknowledge the hypothesis, which is between invest money and make money. So relating everything back to finance, what we do in finance, maybe as a fund manager, is we analyze the fundamentals of a company. So we look at the hypotheses that are baked into that company. In software investment management, we should be looking at the fundamentals of a business case. Or business case being, again, features or projects. So unlike the gnomes, we want to make it up with interim stops. And the model that Tom and I have come up with has a number of interim stops. So we spend some money, we get some people, we deliver some software, impact, and more money. So ideally, we've now separated out these hypotheses. So the first hypothesis is, if I spend some money, I get X amount of people in return. Okay? If I get those X amount of people, then I get some software delivery, and so on and so forth. You can follow that through yourself. So ideally, what we want to do now is to test those hypotheses. So we want to prove them or disprove them. Very hard to prove them until you're done, but we can certainly aim to disprove them. And actually what happens is each one of these hypotheses now becomes very relevant to people in organizations. So spending money and getting people is probably something, if I was writing a business case, I would want to go and talk to my recruitment or HR department about. Is it valid that for X amount of thousands of dollars, I can expect to bring on a team in 2 months with this skill set? Maybe, maybe not. So things like lean startup and hypothesis-driven development talk about exposing hypotheses and going after them and testing those hypotheses. So we want to invalidate them quickly. And what we found was that as we started to write the business case in this manner, we actually started to discuss the hypothesis. Just sat around a table, we started to discuss hypothesis. And that led to a couple of things. One, we were able to throw business cases straight out the window. And those that got through that level of vetting, we had much more confidence in because we'd broken them down into the steps. Also, we noticed that given this amount of hypothesis and these linked hypotheses, we kind of realized that it's not really surprising that we really struggle with the uncertainty around software investments. So if there's that level of uncertainty in every single step, no surprise that sometimes some of our investments go off course.
So how that looks like in examples. So Ben and I were working at a place where we used to just have a business case which was pretty much costs and return. The focus would then go into collecting underpants. So by trying to apply this kind of method, we tried to drill down into what the assumptions were. So typically all the focus went onto delivery and tracking, and that was always a bad pattern. So by drawing this up and saying, right, okay, let's walk through it. If we believe that if we spend $100,000, we get a team for 4 sprints, a capable team. And we believe that capable team in 4 sprints will be able to deliver the required features. So we estimate that work can be done in about 4 sprints. We believe that delivering those features will decrease the number of daily failed transactions by 1,000. So that's a specific impact in our business. Those transactions cost us time and money to fix, and we get fined if we fail certain clients and in certain situations. We believe that if we decrease the number of daily failed transactions by 1,000, we will save $2,000 per day in fines and staffing costs. So normally we would have a make 2,000 per day from a 100,000 investment, and we'd just work with that. But going back this way, we can challenge each of those. Do we have the right people in place? Do we really think we can make 1,000 transactions? Is that what we're going to do that? Start asking those types of questions. Before that, we had no link back to the work. We really didn't know what we were going to do to change the world. We'd end up with products with bloated features that no one was using. Think Word and so on. So that's how we capture a business case, and that's pretty similar to writing not dissimilar to the formation behind where we'd go with a feature or user story. So we start with that as our business case. We think actually this could be applied a lot wider than just in finance software and in software in general. We think this is generally applicable across all domains. So now I'd like us to think of another domain. One let's pick the, I don't know, the field of hunting psychopathic sharks, for example. So if we take another business case, bear with me. If we consider Chief Brodies Dilemma, so we have an assumption. If we believe that if we spend $10,000, we're going to get a competent and sober captain with the right boat for the job, who will kill the psycho shark, which will yield thousands in tourist money. So there are our assumptions.
Can I just see, how many of you have actually seen Jaws? Good, okay.
The rest work with us. So it's important just to think of those assumptions. $10,000, sober captain, right boat, kill shark. Easy. Roll the film.
Got the lights.
I value my neck a lot more than $3,000, Chief. I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10. I had a little drink about an hour ago, and it's got right to my head.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So as we see, assumptions can end us with us spitting up in half and at the bottom of the ocean, so we need to be really careful with them. That's why we focus so much on them in our business cases.
So we have exposed scary hypothesis in our business case, and we say, yep, it looks like a compelling investment. But we also need to consider the impact of adding that investment against all of our other investments. So what we do is, well, what we don't want to do is this. So this is kind of a component dependency diagram. So we're not saying that we should do upfront analysis of all of the potential impacts of every component on one other by adding an investment to our portfolio. But what we are saying is we need to broadly understand what the impact of adding another investment into our group of investments or portfolio might be. So in finance, we have a concept of diversification. And diversification says if you're invested with all of your money in one country or in one industry, for example, you might want to spread that money around to diversify the risk. So we can apply that concept into software, almost. So what we want to do in software is to diversify the portfolio or the investments in our portfolio. So we want to diversify the investments with regard to people's skills. We don't want to pick 4 or 5 of our highest value business cases if they all require the same team of 10 Java developers. That's going to cause its own problems. We need to diversify the area in which these software investments are going to impact. So if we're all trying to change the same technical components at the same time, we're going to have problems, although obviously continuous integration tooling will help that, but we want to diversify the technical side of it as well.
So what does that look like as a practice, as an example here of a technique? So this is a skills matrix or skills liquidity matrix, and at that point I should give a nod to Chris Matz, who helped us very much with implementing this and designing it. We had quite a few projects that were coming down that had similar skills, but when they were scheduled, no one had looked at the skill set. So they both, due diligence was done, analysis, quite a bit of investment to make sure it was we thought that was a good business case, it was viable. We wanted to do 2 of those. When we came to look at our skills that we had in, we were short on Java development. So a lot of work had gone into that, and we had 3 choices. We could either try and run both of those projects in parallel very slowly whilst we tried to hire or skill people up. We could just do one of them and not do the other one. Or we could do one of a lower value than the one we wanted to do. So not an optimal choice. In that example, we chose to do one and skill up. What it enabled us to start thinking about was we should think a bit longer term about our skills and set our horizons. And I think Agile doesn't mean just looking in front of your nose at short term, there's still expectations of a lot of investments going on at once. So something like this can be very helpful in plotting out where we are. And I should point out, when we fill this in, it's not an exercise to manage performance of individuals. I self-elect roughly how I think I am in some of these skills, and we look at languages, kind of the domains, the value streams we're working in, some of the products we know, and that's kind of a marker for a conversation. I can look down there and say, right, I've got a bunch of individuals here who have these kind of skills. I can look at whether, given the portfolio of investments, the projects I've got coming through, can I start maybe training others, load balancing, trying to get more skills in the department, and where I'm short, maybe I need to go to market. So it helps us with longer-term projection of resources and helping people develop, and offering people, well, we need these kind of skills, and where people are interested, then they can take that as a development path of their own.
Good stuff. So we're halfway through our investment management course, or not halfway, but we're a little way through. We've decided now that we want to invest. We've decided we want to invest in X amount of features. The next thing that we say should happen is we should establish some boundaries of performance. So what we don't want to be doing, if you can make that out, is to try and pick a precise time. We don't want to pick a precise impact, or we don't want to pick a precise income. What we do want to do, if you remember this model, is to consider the hypothesis again. So there's hypothesis at every link, and hypotheses by nature are inherently uncertain. So with a hypothesis, we say, we think it's going to turn out like this, but we acknowledge that it could turn out slightly differently. So it could be wildly wrong, but we'll have some confidence around our hypothesis. So what we can do then is we can express that uncertainty as a range. And in finance, we have a concept of a stop loss. So a stop loss is a lower limit on an investment, which creates a range. And while the price of that investment is inside a range, that portfolio manager can make autonomous decisions. In software, we should probably be aiming to do this as well. So we should extrapolate our hypothesis to form a plan, and then we should define that range explicitly. And also, we should also get autonomous power to act within that range. So as long as we're within the range, we still have autonomy. We visualize that using a tool we call range planning. And the outcome is that basically we turn quite often a subjective, how is delivery going? Yeah, it's going okay, I think we're okay with that, to a very, very precise, delivery is within allowable tolerances of impact or income or cost.
So how that looks in example, hopefully you can read that. So we start with, when we started delivering this was all we had. So we worked with cost and return before we'd implemented impact. So we have our forecasted costs in the middle. So from our business case before, we thought we'd spend 100,000 to save 2,000 a day. So we forecast our cost and return. And as Ben just described, we set lower bounds and upper bounds to both return and cost. So these are the first and last steps in our process. So within that, anyone on the product team has autonomy to make decisions around what to build and get feedback on whether it's going well. Outside of those bounds is a conversation. So we kick this off with a conversation with our stakeholders to say, well, what does good look like? You know, at what point are you happy for us to keep making decisions? At what point do you want us to come back and say whether we need to change our tack or maybe pull this project or whatever decision we arrive at? This allows us, it sets some bounds for us as a product team to make our own decisions. But the feedback from cost to return is pretty slow. And in a complex system with a lot of investments going on, it's very hard to see the correlation between the investment we put in and the return we put output. So that isn't our end point. So we then start looking at delivery. So, and these are tools a lot of our product teams are now just taking on and using for themselves, and they can have autonomous conversations with stakeholders of their own that set boundaries. So within delivery, that if you see that our little box with the dashed line going off it, the start of that dashed line is when the team plan on starting work on that thing. The box represents the range of expected delivery. So the start of the box being early and the end of the box being the latest expected delivery. We've used a bunch of techniques for this, so team weeks, blink estimation, t-shirt sizes, even and statistical forecasting as we're using now, to try and predict when that range might be. That basically gives us we still want feedback on software, so although we say it's not the most interesting thing in the world and we want to shift focus away from it, we do still need that feedback because we want to know when we're likely to have an impact. So we plan that out as well. But we still have a lag. So delivery still lags return in most instances, certainly in the fields we work in. So in our example of failing transactions, that work might not go away for a while, or we might, to repurpose or change the roles of people who do that work, it might take a while to collect that information and work out whether we need less people doing that job. Or something like fines, maybe even that's a monthly thing, or there's cycles to this stuff. So a lot of this feedback for return is still quite lagged. So to complete our model, and we haven't put people in here yet, we just use sort of skills liquidity as our tool for that. This draws the fourth of our 5 steps, so impact, and probably the most critical. In this example, we'd set an upper bound of 10,000 fails, and we were trying to move it down to 9,000 fails. That was going to save us our 2,000 a day. We knew that if we didn't move it by 10 or it went above 10, that was going to be very bad. We needed a conversation about that. So we set our upper bound at 10, and we set a lower bound at 7,000. And some might ask why a lower bound might be important. It's good, it's going down. Well, actually, if I've only got one team on it, and I've shifted the world from 10,000 to 7,000, which by rough calculations, might be 6,000, 8,000 a day or whatever, then maybe I've struck gold and I want to invest more in that. And that's very useful information to have a conversation with stakeholders to say, this is going really well. Maybe we should put some more on this. So that allows us to make some changes, and you can see the delivery goes through to the impact. There's still a lag between impact and return. So it's vital we pick good proxy measures. So those impact measures as a proxy for that outcome. We need to pick a good measure and we need to review that regularly. Okay, so we've invested, we've got our ranges, and we're going to go ahead and execute on our investment now. So essentially, what we don't want is to keep our heads down in a tunnel, within our range, making our decisions, but without lifting our head up. And ultimately, we don't want to be blindsided by something we're not looking out for. So what we do want to do is proactively manage risk. So this is about looking ahead. So in financial investment management, portfolio managers or fund managers will be aware of things that might change their portfolio in the future. So it might be an interest rate change, for example. I know this is all very riveting. But an interest rate change will change their investment portfolio. And actually, what we're going to do in software, or what we're proposing we do in software, is to do a similar kind of thing. We should look ahead to how the market might change some of our investments in our portfolio. So we could look ahead for competition, so announcing competing products. We could look ahead for industry or regulatory changes, but also we could look ahead for opportunities. So the market might change and an opportunity might present itself, and that might shift some of the investments that were good before into redundancy, and we might replace them with the new opportunity. So an example of this from an app development company we work with. It's very simple, actually, to start scraping information. Google, quite good at information. So we can just set up Google alerts, and that's what we're using at the minute. So we'll set up for looking at our competitors. We'll search for specific keywords of things that are interesting to us and adjust that. And we'll collect those on a regular basis, scrape that information, and then form that into a report. At the moment, we're kind of manually doing that and shaping it ourselves into a report that we feed back and have a conversation with stakeholders about. But it's something we plan to automate and get better at actually collecting good information. So there's probably other things out there like industry publications and white papers and other things that we want to consider, but at the moment we're just trying to collect all that information, shape it up to our stakeholders and say, does this affect any of the business cases, any of the things we're running in the portfolio, and does it affect our thinking as to the things we should be investing in? So it's proactively looking for things that might change our portfolio of investments, our software and our features.
Okay, so we're not getting blindsided, but we also, as part of our boundaries for performance, we said we wanted to measure income. So measuring income is not some kind of dream world or fantasy land. It can actually be done, although maybe sometimes we don't do it. So in financial investment management, we're pretty good at this. People on a daily basis measure profit and loss. They will be very happy to talk about the profit and less happy to talk about the loss. And a good example of that would be someone like Nick Leeson, who hid away billions of dollars of loss and ultimately brought down Barings Bank. So it's not infallible, absolutely. But in software, we need to consider the same concept. So software, we don't tend to do this. For some reason, we don't tend to do it, but we think it's probably longer-term projects that suffer from this. So projects that span maybe months or even years. And the reason that becomes a problem is because, well, two reasons really. First, actually, people lose touch with why they started that project in the first case. So the person who started the project has left, and now no one really knows why it's happening, and people are just continuing it. Secondly, structural changes in the organization might completely invalidate that investment anyway. But actually, in many organizations, that still doesn't seem to stop people either. So we continue to carry on, and we default to our old friend measuring software delivery.
An example of this, so the range planner we used, we easily turned into a tracker of the actual. So going back to our example and looking at return, we'd predicted a return of 1,000 and set lower and upper bounds. Now, in this example, we were working at a company where they were pulling investments, pulling business cases, features, projects quite early, and often we were spinning wheels and just kept churning requirements, and we couldn't really tell whether we were having a desired effect. In fact, we weren't having a good effect because we just kept spinning wheels, basically. By setting those bounds, as we did here, the team actually got to make the choice on whether to pull the plug on some of these features. So, whereas normally, so in April they went slightly under expected or forecasted income, and that normally would have been a painful conversation. The team kept on, and in May, that thing would have definitely been pulled. But you can see it's not lower than the lower bounds. Now, the team there took a punt. Well, actually, they've got a framework here, so they took a slight gamble, and they said, well, I think actually the features we've got here will change the world, which it did eventually, but that thing would never have happened had it have not been for the fact that they got to choose their own work. And that was a really important learning for management as well as them. So giving teams some autonomy, some process for decision-making and some bounds for that allows a bit freer thinking, we think.
Okay, and next up, measure impacts. So we've kind of gone through our orange blocks, and one that we haven't talked about is measuring impacts, or at least made the link between finance and software. So it isn't a blank page. It isn't not doing it. It isn't talking about it but not doing it. Like, we can actually do this. In finance, people are pretty good at this as well. So they look at the impacts in the underlying investment. For example, if I was to invest in Ford Motor Company, I might want to look at the number of cars sold as a leading indicator to the ultimate, which is when I make money and the share price rises. So I do my due diligence and I look at those fundamentals. In software, as we said, I think we're probably still stuck in measuring software. At best, we've swapped percentage complete for number of story points complete, maybe. And further to that, the Agile Manifesto says working software is the primary measure of progress. So not only that, the Agile Manifesto is saying that working software is the goal. That was great 15 years ago because working software was our indication of how far through we were done. But nowadays, that's kind of kind of lacking a little bit. Impacts of software delivery are almost immediate. So we do something, we put it into production, and we can see the effect. It could be positive, it could be negative. So luckily, we can use that impact analysis as a leading indicator for ultimately some income, some change in dollars. When we have a number of these impacts, so these impacts might be number of breaks, as Tom said, number of fails, number of traded shares. These form a dashboard, essentially. So I can now, the byproduct of our software investment management process is that you end up with an operational dashboard of the health of your company. So I can look at that dashboard and I can tell, we chose this investment and we made something disappear. We kind of pushed down this hump, but we can look at the dashboard and see actually all we did was shift work from one place to another. And it's a similar concept to those guys, have you seen in the fairgrounds, called whack-a-mole? So you whack down the mole and it pops up somewhere else. So this dashboard enables us to avoid just redistributing work and actually helps us to solve problems.
So an example of impact. So in our example of getting down, this is a separate example I picked because it was an interesting sign of a project not working too well. So here, reducing the number of reconciliation breaks, so trying to match trades up. We were trying to reduce that massively through a series of incremental deliveries. We had our bound set, we had our target down to 10, and you can see hopefully getting a good staircase down. In this project, there was the first features arrived in a release, and it was a bigger release than planned, but it had a massive effect, and you can see that where the black line goes down, it had a massive effect in reducing the number of breaks, much more than we expected. But then the features after that didn't, and we were delivering more than just that little one staircase down. There was a number of deliveries, and it just wasn't happening. So it went out of bounds at just before May, as you can see there, and as we crossed that boundary, it's a marker for a conversation, as I mentioned. So we had a conversation with stakeholders, and that's not just a binary pull plug, it's out of bounds. It's more of a, what things are we trying? How's that working? What's the data telling us? What impacts, what assumptions have we invalidated? And really going through some of that data to have a meaningful conversation about whether or not to keep investing in that project. In this instance, we didn't and canned it, but the option was open, and it was the conversation that was the important piece.
So we're moving around now. Steer by exception, decentralized decision-making. All sounds very robotic, but actually really what it means is empower the team. So what we don't want to end up with, so those of you who've been, had the delight of maybe a project steering meeting or a project governance meeting, may have seen something that looks like this, where there's just lines and lines and lines of actions to review. Some of it, or most of it, is probably completely irrelevant, and actually the important stuff is hidden amongst that irrelevance. So we don't want a situation like that. We do, however, want something where we can steer by exception. So in finance, as we said, we have a concept like this. So we say, within the bounds of your performance bounds as a portfolio manager, you can act autonomously. So it enables this hierarchy of autonomous decision making. There is no way one person can run $3 billion of investment, and in software, there's no way that every decision can go back up the chain to one person to make that decision. So we rely upon explicit bounds that we talked about in range planning. We allow people closest to the work to make the decisions. They are much more effective at making decisions than someone far higher up the hierarchy. And actually that has a nice additional outcome, which is that it really it provides kind of accountability to the team who are delivering the software. So when they have accountability, they also generally have much more motivation. They go about solving problems in a much more active way. And ultimately, they're not just turning a software delivery handle.
So the last view of the ranged planner. So basically, just to illustrate, we've got a lot more investments going on than one, so I simplified the initial versions. We've probably got a lot of impacts, as Ben mentioned. Drawing all those impacts into kind of an operational dashboard means we're looking at various things going on at once. We've got quite a lot of features in play at once. We will limit WIP to a certain point, but we've got a lot of teams working on these things. So that allows us to draw through. And what we found by that is it changes the dynamics of the conversations we have with stakeholders. So where Ben said earlier, the least interesting thing about talking about this stuff is talking about the delivery of software. It changes it to how that software changes the world. Because we can start talking about the real effect it has, and the real effect it has on other things in the operations in the business. And that's really interesting conversations. By doing it, by having this flow through and having all this data and using this data in our meetings, in how we drive our business, it really shifts the conversation.
So, final step, to learn, to regularly reflect and adapt. So, as we said earlier on, we're not doing too good at this in our investment decisions. Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And by that definition, some of us are guilty of being insane. What we do think is that we should learn to make better investments. And hopefully you should all now have got a copy of the book. If you haven't, you can come and see us afterwards. This is actually an interesting area because we believe that actually it's the other way around. So we've talked a lot about how finance is better at doing some of this stuff than software, but actually I can't think of any examples of, and having worked in finance, I can't think of any examples of where people are routinely sitting down and judging their investment decisions. So they don't retrospect on their investment decisions in finance. In software, however, we're actually quite good at this. So people will often say, let's have a retrospective, and we retrospect to basically continuously improve. So if we're going to continuously improve our delivery, why don't we continuously improve our investment decision making, i.e. our feature selection or our project selection, and why don't we go a step further and continuously improve our process? So Tom and I's 5-step process, why don't we have a meta process which continually improves that? So the example here was when Tom and I worked at an app development company. This was actually a retrospective on an acquisition and integration investment. We took a number of stakeholders across all areas of the business, and we did a retrospective. And that retrospective didn't just look at delivery retrospection or how we could improve delivery, but it also looked at how we could improve impacts, how we could improve the costs, and ultimately how we could improve income. Now, in this specific example, unfortunately, there had been no income off the back of that acquisition yet, so that was a very quick point of retrospection. However, we did learn some other stuff. So specifically, we were very optimistic or very overly optimistic about our hiring hypotheses. We took a lot longer to get people in to support the integration than we thought we would. We were overly optimistic about our delivery hypothesis. We were optimistic about the estimates that we provided for some of that software delivery. We actually retrospected on the fact that we shouldn't have done a retrospection just at the end, and actually we should have done it at points throughout the software project or the investment. And actually, the most important in my eyes was in the business case that we reviewed, there were no impacts. There was no explicit impact. There was a dollar cost, and a dollar income, but there were no leading indicators in there. There were no conditions of success with regard to impacts. So the key actionable thing we took away from that was that all investments, internal and external, should now carry impact metrics or impact goals.
So we've thrown a lot at you there. So to conclude, the main things that we'd like you to consider taking away and applying and thinking how our stakeholders apply investment management. Test linked hypotheses, so acknowledge and explicitly define the assumptions that underlie our business cases and test those as quickly and as cheaply as possible. Show uncertainty in ranges, embrace uncertainty. Don't just pretend it's not there and ignore it and try and aim for precision. Embrace it, use range planning, set better expectations. Success and failure isn't a binary thing. So acknowledge that and use it to your advantage. Measure impact. Impact is a leading indicator for return. So impact is our key metric. Allow decentralized decision making. Use tools to help people make their own choices. The people who are closer to the work, the teams, the product teams, managers and so on. Enable them to make the decisions and learn. Keep improving the model for your investments and keep using the data you get out to drive that improvement.
So whilst we've thrown a lot at you today, we actually believe that a lot of this can be used in isolation. So you could select a number of these steps and use them to your advantage without going the whole hog. So I'd encourage you to have a go at some of it. At the least, we should all be very good at retrospectives, and you can apply those to investment decisions, but we'd hope you can take some of the other stuff away. So I'd like to say thank you and ask if there are any questions. Is anyone awake? Do you have a question? No?
Questions.
Any questions?
Yeah. Lisa.
It might be too hard a question because the last couple of graphs you showed, I didn't understand at all. It looked like you were having a conversation when things were going well.
Oh, sorry. No, the one before, the impact one.
Yeah, I didn't understand that one either.
So here, the number of fails. So the high point is bad here because the number of break. This is the number of things failing in our business. Yeah. So high is bad. So we're trying to lower that thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. I was trying to use red and green to illustrate, but didn't call it out. Thanks, Lisa.
More questions.
So when I get it right, you try to apply it to your business features, more or less, right? But also, did you try to apply it to your changes, to your process and stuff like that, to measure impact and expected outcome?
So basically, yes, because in the short, everything that a business does is an investment, whether it's external or internal. So investing in your processes, investing to streamline your processes, you should be able to see some impact to that and ultimately some dollars to that. The problem is, as you move from Scrum to Kanban, it's going to be very hard to monetize the effect of moving from Scrum to Kanban. But I can use leading indicators as some indication of making more money. And a good example of that might be throughput, or it might be cycle time. So of the process investment, things like cycle time and throughput would be good indicators.
Hi. I've been trying much simpler versions of this. My experience is that the business often has not have a very explicit investment plan. Is the business you're in an investment business so that they're used to that kind of work?
You would think so, but not necessarily. We've had to work very hard to get them to talk in that language and to get ourselves to talk in that language. So that's been painstakingly looking, and I guess analysing how the software we build, what it actually changes and trying to figure out those things. So actually a lot of it is studying how users interact with our software and how their life changes. So actually a lot of that has been sort of carrying out studies within the business and gradually learning and collecting that data back. So it wasn't just to sort of flick the switch and talk that language thing, definitely not. It was more of a self-inspection of how our software works and how our users work it, yeah.
So I think that's a very good point. There is incredible value in just walking through the process. Collecting the numbers, yes, absolutely. It would be wonderful if we guided our ships based off GPS and data, but we kind of sail by gut at the moment in a lot of instances. The sense check, which is, here is my business case, here's the explicit hypothesis, that's kind of the sense check for the gut. So at the minimum, if you lay your business case out in that manner, you're going to force those people to really answer the questions. Now, unfortunately, we can't force them to come to the table if they want to bury their heads in the sand, but it's a good tool.
One question, in the real world, at what stage do you agree on the expected impact? So, I mean, before the or does the team do it, or do we say, okay, one impact will be the shark is dead, another impact could be boat goes better, whatever. Yep. When do you do that?
So we do it quite a number of times along, but it starts with the analysis of a business case. So that would be probably for a project or maybe a set of features in most of the places I work with, but it's before you feed stuff into the delivery pipeline. So before things like, if we consider things like specification workshops where you define what the thing should do, quite a bit before that, as we're doing some analysis on the kind of things that go through, and that will vary in the models we're using. So in Scrum, maybe we're doing that 3 months before in a kind of scaled framework approach. In Kanban, maybe we're doing that on very smaller things. So it changes depending on the context, but it's a little bit before to quite a bit before, depending on your model, I guess.
And ultimately, ideally, collaboratively as well. So the people who are closest to knowing the impact are going to be the best informed, but obviously, collaboration is going to help to drive out some of these assumptions.
Thanks for the talk. Nicholas Taleb talks about sort of how we live in Mediocristan and Extremistan, and there is talk about that software is in Extremistan, and therefore it's very hard to measure. What's your thoughts on that, and how would you respond to that?
Well, I think it's diminishing utility of returns, if I'm honest. So going to this level will depend on what industry you work in, and it will depend on how advanced you are. What I would say is the small amount of investment that it takes to get a rudimental version of this going pays dividends, certainly in more mature industries, but I can understand how closing the loop and being very close to a customer is much more beneficial than going through this kind of framework.
So more questions. So thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.